Welcome to Everything Financial Radio here on the Legacy Radio Network. I'm your host, Dennis Tubbergen. If you're a repeat listener, thanks for tuning in again. If you're a new listener, welcome. We are here every week at this time, and we talk about what's going on in the economy, politics, and how it might affect you and your money. Got a great show for you today. I've got Mr. Karl Denninger stopping by. Karl's going to talk about what his view is of what's going on in Europe, how the election might affect the markets. Looking forward to our conversation with him. Also, a gentleman this past week predicted the Dow could potentially hit 4,000. That man's name, Greg Mannarino, and he was quoted in an article that I'll talk about on today's program. Jim Rogers, a past guest on this radio program, said that he feels money printing is going to run amok, and now he's investing based on what's happening, not what he would like to do. We'll look at his prediction as well, and I will give you mine on today's program. Also, what's going on in Greece? I'll give you an update as to what's going on in Greece. Greece is in a full-fledged deflationary depression, and we now learn, as I'll share with you on today's program, they may be almost out of money. What does that mean for you and your nest egg? What's going on in Argentina? Massive inflation. People are taking to the streets. Just the opposite of what's happening in Greece. Greece is in a deflationary depression. Argentina experiencing massive inflation. What does Argentina have in common with the United States? And can we go back and find some times historically when similar situations have existed, and can we take a look at what happened then to maybe get a better idea of what's going to happen now? I think you'll want to stay tuned for that. And also, Richard Russell, the godfather of newsletter writers, has written a piece stating that we are seeing insane bubbles everywhere, and he's looking for these bubbles, of course, as bubbles often do, to collapse. And we'll talk about what bubbles they are and how it might affect you and your money. Certainly also want to invite you to go to investingapproach.com and get a copy of our 2012 guide, Surviving a Market Crash. The website is investingapproach.com. The guide, the 2012 guide, Surviving a Market Crash, is free. We'd be glad to send it to you. Just enter your name and address, and we'll be very, very glad to get you a complimentary copy. Also, quick reminder, if you'd like to listen to any of the interviews that we do here on the program, you can go to everythingfinancialradio.com, and you can now go to iTunes and download them and listen to them at your convenience. I'm very pleased to have back with me here on the Legacy Radio Network, Mr. Karl Denninger. You can find Karl's work at market-ticker.org. He is a prolific commentator on all things financial, economic, and political. And, Karl, thanks for taking time out to be on the program.
Oh, thank you very much.
Karl, the election is over. President Obama has won a second term. And one day after the election, in fact, Obama had probably no more than gone to sleep after a long night, and Fitch, the ratings agency, came out and issued a warning telling the United States, get your fiscal house in order. Is that aimed directly at President Obama?
It's aimed at both President Obama and Congress. I would say that it is more of a problem from a congressional standpoint than anything else because, of course, all the president can do is sign laws. He can't actually write them. The root of the problem is that we have been running approximately 10% fiscal deficits for the last 4 years. And by doing this, we've covered up what would have otherwise been recognized as an economic depression because the economist's definition of a depression is a 10% decline in gross domestic product from top to bottom. We've been staving this off now for 4 years running. So on a compounded basis, it is, of course, much higher than 10% at this point. And what Fitch is saying is stop that. Well, if you were to cut government spending by 10% of GDP, then GDP would immediately decline, of course, by that same 10%. If you raise taxes by 10% of GDP, then either consumption or investment decrease by that same 10%. And, of course, that's the same thing. GDP goes down by the same amount. So what Fitch is essentially saying, and now Moody's has chimed in as well with the same warning, is stop it. We warned you before. We mean it. And if you don't, we're going to cut your debt rating. which means the cost of credit default insurance and financing is going to go up. And, oh, by the way, that means interest expense rises, and you get the same result as if you took the action. So it's back into a corner. Choose how you want to get struck and with what and where and what part of your body, but you're going to take the blow. And here it comes.
So, Karl, maybe just talking a bit for our listeners that maybe didn't follow necessarily all that math, let's back up and explain to the listeners how is gross domestic product calculated? You know, what are the components? And then could you drill down just a little bit for our listeners that may not be familiar with that and just talk about how one of those elements that's used to calculate GDP may affect another?
Sure. GDP is just simply a mathematical sum. It's second-grade arithmetic. It's consumption, that is what you buy and consume, plus investment, which is, you know, build houses, buses, whatever, plus government spending, that is the money that government hands out to people through various programs, plus net exports, which is exports minus imports. So what you export counts towards GDP, but you have to deduct imports because imports are a negative in that you're not producing things in this country, you're producing them somewhere else. So when you have this basic calculation, this is where the number comes from. If you increase government spending, then G goes up by that number of dollars, and that makes GDP go up. If you decrease government spending, you cut spending, then G goes down, and GDP goes down by that same amount. If you increase taxes, in order to pay taxes, somebody has to either not consume as much because it takes money out of their wallet, or they have to not invest as much because there's only two things you can do with the money that you have and that you earn. You can either spend it or you can invest it. It has to go somewhere, and saved money counts as investment. So if you increase taxes, the same amount has to come out of GDP also. And so what Fitch is saying and what Moody's is saying is that you're running a credit card. It's exactly identical to you in your household making $100,000 but spending $110,000 and charging it every month. And it seems as though you have a household income of $110,000, but you really don't. Your real household income is $100,000. And when you stop running those deficits, then your household balance sheet, your picture of the world, is going to go back to what it was before. And the ratings agencies are saying, you've been cheating and lying for 4 years. You said you were going to take care of this. Remember, President Obama came into office originally saying that he was going to cut the deficit in half from Bush's level, which was $600 billion a year, within 4 years. Instead, it went to over $1 trillion a year. So it didn't get cut in half, it roughly doubled. And the ratings agencies are saying you've had enough time to do what you said you're going to do. Now you either do it or you're going to get penalized.
Now, Karl, interestingly, during the campaign, I believe even President Obama, I might be mistaken, but it's pretty much a given that under the president's projections, we're going to have $20 trillion of debt at a minimum when the next presidential election is held. So at what point do you think we see interest rates spike? Do we see China or anybody else that wants to buy U.S. government debt say, you know what, enough is enough. I cannot loan you money for 30 years at just over 3%. I need 5%. And now we become, to maybe some extent, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and some of the European countries that have seen their borrowing costs rise.
Well, it's not, it's not somewhat. It's pretty much exactly identical. I mean, if you look at the reality, $20 trillion, assuming that is where this was to go, at 5% would be $1 trillion a year of interest. So the government last year took in $2 trillion and change in taxes. So if the interest rate on that debt was to go to 5%, then about half of what the government takes in taxes would immediately have to go out in the form of interest payments. That obviously is not going to happen. By the way, last year it was about $350 billion, so that would be more than doubling. To put some better numbers on this, that number, that $600 billion increase, is very close to the total amount that we spend every year on defense. So this is the size of the problem that we are dealing with here when that move in interest rate comes. And the longer that we continue to screw around with this and cheat, the worse this problem gets. It eventually gets to the point that what happened in Greece occurs, and what is going to happen over in Europe, and we're seeing some more noise being made over in Europe that there are some problems, which is also part of what we're seeing in the post-election moves in the markets. And that is that you back yourself into a corner. There is no effective way for you to actually get out. Okay, so once you get into that corner, the only option is to tell your creditors they're not going to get paid because you can't possibly pay it down. We are not there today, but we're getting very close. And if we get to that $20 trillion level, which is an unimaginable amount compared to the size of our economy, we will be over that edge. What various economists and various models have shown is that once you get to about 80 to 90% of the economy in outstanding debt, you are dangerously close to a point where you simply cannot pay it off anymore. And so then the spiral begins. And all we're really arguing about is what sets it off. Japan has had 20 years where they've gotten away with this, and so there are people in the United States that think we can get away with it for 20 years as well. But eventually this game ends, and the problem is nobody knows exactly when that occurs. Remember that when Greece blew up the first time a couple of years ago, there was no hint that there was a serious problem there until about a month before it happened. And then all of a sudden, within the space of about 30 days, things went from okay to terrible. And that is the way these things occur. Historically, it's always how they've occurred. It's how it happened in Argentina. It's how it happened in Zimbabwe. It's how it happened in Greece. It's how it's going to happen here.
We're going to continue our conversation with Mr. Karl Denninger in the next segment when Everything Financial Radio returns. Stay with us.